Welcome to Flipped Classroom. Today's lesson is in preparation for the midterm exam. The goal of the midterm is to be able to analyze Dark Night of the Soul with a focus on the causes and effects of reading and writing. A cause-effect analysis explores the relationship between events or circumstances and the outcome that results. So in this case, we're looking at the relationship between why people read and write, and what is the result of reading and writing. Whenever a question asks why, it requires you to discover the cause. There are many purposes behind a cause-effect essay. Sometimes the goal is to inform. Other times it is to speculate. And oftentimes it is to persuade. Richard Miller's essay, Dark Night of the Soul, does a little bit of all three. He's informing his readers about the reasons why people read. He speculates about the future of reading and writing. And he tries to persuade the audience of the importance of reading and writing and the role it can play in bringing an end to violence in the chaotic modern world. Let's take a look at a basic example of a cause-effect analysis. Here's a simple one. Why do babies cry? Babies cry because they're hungry, or they're teething, or they need attention. What happens when babies cry? Someone will feed the baby, someone will change the baby, someone will try to figure out why the baby is in distress. The causes and effects are usually factual. The challenging part is the critical thinking. Why do we need to know the causes and effects of a baby crying? And that gets to a deeper human insight. So keep in mind when you're writing your cause-effect essay about reading and writing, the causes and effects are the simplest parts. That's identifying facts. The challenging part is the critical thinking, why you need to know these causes and effects. So let's take a more specific look at the causes and effects of Dark Night in the Soul. In terms of reading, the article discusses why adults read. In your cause-effect essay based on Dark Night of the Soul, you need to come up with the answer of why do adults read? And your evidence will come from personal experience as well as Richard Miller's opinion. Also, what happens when adults read? Once again, your evidence will come from personal experience and Richard Miller's opinion. You would look at the same issues with writing. Why do adults write? And what happens when adults write? And again, your evidence would come from personal experience as well as Richard Miller's opinion presented in Dark Night of the Soul. Miller uses 5 main examples for his evidence, so you should be familiar with all 5. 1, the Columbine shooters, specifically Eric Harris. Martin Amos's The Information. McCandless and Krakauer's analysis. Descartes and Mary Carr. Eric Harris's diary is used as evidence to explain what causes somebody to write. And Miller writes, and Miller cites the following reason as to why Eric Harris wrote his diary. The exclusionary environment of mandatory schooling that fosters feelings of rage and helplessness that cannot be contained. In other words, the negative impact of school caused Eric Harris to write the diary. And Miller goes on to point out that Eric Harris also had dreams of fame and immortality. So what is the effect of writing the diary? Miller points out that it wasn't enough catharsis to prevent the massacre. It wasn't enough of a release of emotions. It needed something. People need more than writing to prevent such extreme behaviors. But Miller also points out that writing was a step in the right direction. Miller questions throughout Dark Night of the Soul, can writing be a source for solving modern-day social ills, such as school shootings and other acts of violence? And Miller does point out that reading and writing have no magical transformative powers. It takes a combination of reading and writing as well as something else. And he's trying to get at that something else in Dark Night of the Soul. Miller also uses Martin Amos's book, The Information, and he points out that Amos debunks the notion that reading makes you a better person. And even though writing does provide access to immortality, it really doesn't matter because the world is going to end. Tull is a vehicle to prove the writer's point that readers and writers should not be privileged because they are indistinguishable from criminals. They're pretentious, incompetent, and full of self-pity. So you can see that Amos has a negative view of readers and writers. In Miller's analysis, he says, sooner or later, all writers encounter something that robs them of their sleep, something that deprives them of feeling that what they do matters. And this is captured in the evidence from the information. Miller goes on to point out the activity of writing and the inbound information, in other words, reading, to explore creates feelings of hopelessness that we will never have any lasting significance. So the effect of writing, once again, is that it isn't some magical transformative experience. There's some other missing element that needs to go along with this reading and writing. The third source of evidence is McCandless and Krakauer's analysis. Krakauer points out that McCandless was ultimately undone by the great trust he placed in the written words, that he trusted its authors completely, but that books can be a vehicle for making sense of his turbulent and occasionally destructive youth. So Krakauer has a negative and positive perspective on reading and writing. Krakauer also points out that what we read has nothing particularly original. In other words, books have a universal truth. They reflect common human experiences, such as we see both men go through, being frustrated with the real world, going out into wilderness, and struggling. Those are universal truths captured in books, and the readers can use these books, these stories, as a way of understanding their experience. But Krakauer points out, relying on reading as a mode of escape has its own unique set of dangers, as we see with the Alaskan journey into the wilderness that ends in death. So why read? When Krakauer basically says books are fantasy factories, it's almost like a warning, pointing out there are positive aspects to reading, but it can't be done in isolation. There needs to be something else. And Miller is trying to find what that something else is to go along with reading. But for Krakauer, he points out the importance of why we write. Writing is a way of explaining. Krakauer is explaining what happens to McCandless and shows the value of expressing ourselves in reading because it brings us to an understanding, which goes back to Miller's theme of trying to find how reading and writing can play a role in making the world a better place. And as Krakauer points out through his example, writing helps us understand the world we live in. Then Miller moves on to Descartes for evidence. One of the key quotes in Descartes is, "The mind is where the action is." And that basically provides that missing piece that we look for in Eric Harris's diary, in McCandless's journey into the Alaskan wilderness. Reading and writing alone are insufficient. You also need to bring your mind, your critical thinking. So Descartes discovers this because he wants to rid himself of all the false opinions, those things that he has read. And Descartes doubts everything. And through his doubting, his skepticism, he found the mind can provide us with direct access to truth. Because Descartes gives primacy to the mind and its universal truths. So he publishes his meditations, his writings. And through that, he explains, why do we read? We read to find truth. Why do we write? It gives people one tool to finding truth. But finding truth, understanding, cannot be an isolated event of reading and writing. You must include the individual's mind. Because the effect of reading, your head can be filled with lies. And in his case, Descartes' case, it was religious dogma. But the effects of writing allows you to sort out those lies and provides a starting place for skeptics to find the truth, to merge together reading, writing, and the mind to come to the answers that we need as humans in a progressive society. The final evidence comes through the example of Mary Karr and the section on the memoir trend. Miller points out that memoirs return to the scenes of violence and violation, worth pondering, For here one finds evidence of one way in which writing continues to matter. So it is the writer who goes through a sense of catharsis, reflects on his or her path to understand what has happened in his or her life. And when someone reads the memoir, reads those biographies, the reader can make a connection to the writer and begin to make sense of his or her life as well. So books and writing generate a sense of possibility, a sense that a better, brighter future is out there. So Dark Night of the Soul, while it may start out negative and it may be hard to find how Miller thinks reading and writing can have a positive role in promoting humanity, by the end of the article, he ends on quite an optimistic note, finding the place, specifically in memoir, that will bring us that brighter future out there. And it hopes for you to go back and reread the article Dark Night of the Soul, perceiving Eric Harris's diary as a memoir, looking back at Amos Martin's The Information as a memoir of his life, looking at McCandless's journey as a memoir of his experience, and looking at Descartes' Meditations as a memoir, because all 5 of them are people that were troubled, living in violence, violation, and they ponder their experiences to come to a truth that will make the future brighter for all of us. So Miller's closing thoughts. He writes, "What to do? These concerns about the diminishing power of reading and writing serve as the launching points for sustained investigation into the value of humanistic inquiry." He's looking for how can reading and writing contribute to making the world a better place, and posing a hypothetical question to the reader, or is reading and writing a dead art? So how to approach the midterm with all this deep reading and writing? Start by having a well-annotated book. Highlight key ideas. Be able to answer the question, why do adults read and write? What is the effect of reading and writing? About 20% of that answer should come from personal experience. The bulk of it, about 80% of your answer, should come from Miller's evidence. And be able to develop an opinion about the importance of reading and writing. Here's some test-taking tips. Closely read the prompt. Though you know it's going to be a cause-effect essay about reading and writing, look at the specific instructions. Do your pre-writing, brainstorm, journal. Create an outline. For your introduction paragraph, you only need a thesis statement. Don't worry about a catchy opening hook. Go straight to your thesis statement. Then have a body paragraph on the causes. Have a body paragraph on the effects. Have a conclusion paragraph and include a work cited. You could write that works cited in your book annotations. Draft your essay, but save the last 10 minutes of the test-taking time for revisions. Read over what you've written. Make sure you've answered all parts of the prompt. The scoring will be based on the student learning outcomes, specifically your ability to read, analyze, and evaluate a variety of nonfiction text. Basically, did you understand? Could you identify and paraphrase the author's main ideas in Dark Night of the Soul? You must be able to write a timed essay with college-level control of mechanics, organization, development, and coherence. In terms of MLA formatting, you just need quotations that have parenthetical citations, which would basically be the page number from the book, and a works cited page. So in review, you're just preparing for a midterm that's a timed cause-effect essay that you'll have 120 minutes, 2 hours to write. Make sure you have your annotated book along with you and manage your time effectively. Good luck on your midterm. Thank you for joining me in Flipped Classroom.